In 2003, Europe saw its hottest summer in almost 500 years. Temperatures soared to nearly 39 degrees Celsius. But there was a problem. A lot of countries, especially in the north, were unprepared. The extreme heat led to the death of at least 30,000 people. Year after year, countries around the world are recording their hottest summers yet, as climate-changing emissions continue to push up temperatures. Some places could even become too hot to live in. Between 1991 and 2018, scientists say that around 37% of summer heat-related deaths were caused by climate change. Even in the US today, more people die from heat every year than from all other weather-related disasters. There's little doubt that this rising heat is a huge threat to our health. So why is it still an under-recognised health emergency? How can countries and communities better prepare to deal with it? And can we keep the heat under control before it's too late? When extreme weather events like wildfires, flooding, or hurricanes happen, they're reported as disasters. But with heat waves, that's not usually the case.
There's nothing really visible about a heat wave. It's uncomfortable and you can feel it for sure, but it's very different than those other disasters.
So unlike, for example, bushfires or flooding events or other extreme weather events that are associated with climate change, they're often perceived as kind of an immediate event or quite violent event, whereas heat waves are always quite passive.
We can only see the deaths that are related to heat when we look at excess deaths. That is, how many more people than usual died during those hot days.
Most of the world's money and power are in northern countries, and so the focus in those places has been on extreme cold. And so I think the focus in the global community may have followed those understandings rather than heat risks.
So what impact does heat have on communities and their existing inequalities? Like other disasters, those who are hit hardest are often the most vulnerable.
People who are most likely to be harmed by heat are the people who are poorer than the population average wherever in the world you are.
It's clearly able to see how specific areas of the world will be hugely impacted by extreme heat, and that's parts of Africa, India, Southeast Asia. The issue in many developing countries is that many people are reliant on outside work regardless of the climatic conditions. So I think there the heat risk is at a very personal level.
In the United States, we know that Black Americans who were segregated into various parts of cities through a process known as redlining, today in those same communities, there's less green space, and that makes them hotter. So Black Americans are facing persistent injustice as a result of that.
But as global warming gets worse, heat is starting to impact richer places too.
And in New York schools, researchers have found that you were more likely to fail your exam if you took it on a hot day than a cold day, and that failure had consequences for your educational trajectory for years.
Cities in, for example, North America or Europe, who might not be really used to heat or who you wouldn't think are very hot areas, it's actually also those cities who are very vulnerable because populations can't cope with heat.
But heat is not just a threat to health, it's also harming other things too, like the economy. In some countries, workers are entitled to leave when temperatures hit a certain point. This could become more common if we have longer stretches of hotter days. The International Labour Organization worked out that if the global temperature rises by 1.5 degrees Celsius, it would lead to a loss of productivity equivalent to 80 million full-time jobs by 2030. Heat is also taking its toll on our infrastructure. Roads can melt, train tracks can buckle, and flights may only be able to take off at night time. Also, with more people getting sick during hotter summers, health services could become overwhelmed. So, how can we better prepare? Here's what some places are doing. In the US, New York City is providing air conditioning to the most vulnerable elderly people, and trying to get the state to provide summer cooling grants for the poor in the same way it provides heating grants in the winter. In South Florida's Miami-Dade County, where they're already facing more than 40 days a year of heat that feels like almost 38 degrees Celsius, the first heat officer has just been appointed to help prepare and adapt the area. Experts also say we should pay more attention to our cities, where more than half of people live.
In most cities, the warming that's happened is predominantly from how cities have been built, not from climate change. We can do a large share to reduce whatever heat risks may come through designing cities in ways that keep them cool.
Right now, some cities are leading the way and trying out innovations to reduce heat risk.
Cities are implementing cooling surfaces, so either on rooftops, so having lighter colors on rooftops, for example, or also changing the consistency or the color of pavements. So it's absorbing less heat and more reflecting sun away. So that also cools down the atmosphere around it. But also, how can you provide shading? How can you provide places where people can go and catch a break from the heat during their time?
But to really deal with growing heatwave risks, we need to address climate change. As long as human activity keeps creating planet heating emissions, then temperatures will keep rising. Some areas of the world may become uninhabitable no matter how much we adapt, which could lead to problems like mass migration.
To some degree, we will have to adapt to rising temperatures and global warming. Ultimately, the best way to adapt to extreme heat is not letting it become even more extreme. We need to cut greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to do all the climate change mitigation work in reducing emissions in the transportation sector, in waste, in buildings, and so on and so forth, to limit global warming so heat does not become as extreme as it's predicted.